It's been quite some time since I dusted off my classic challenge run format, but was there ever any doubt I'd be back? Today I'm going to take on one of my most restricted runs so far, stepping into the shoes of Team Fortress 2's dashing rogue and doing something no Englishman ever should, becoming French. This challenge is going to involve stylish revolvers, sharp knives, and sneaking around. Oh, and a lot of blood on my suit, as I answer the question, can you beat Payday 2 as the spy? Before I go any further, let's check out the rules and stipulations of today's contract. As ever, the goal is to complete Payday 2's career mode from start to finish on a freshly reset account. Yelwonk is going to disguise himself as the most stylish of the TF2 mercs to take on the DC police force, consisting of soldiers, snipers, medics, and heavies. The specific rules of this run are as follows. We can only deal damage using revolvers, akimbo or otherwise, and knives. While Sydney's wing, the butterfly knife, is Spy's staple weapon, there's nothing stopping us from using other knife-shaped weapons throughout this run, including the kunai and throwing knife. This isn't where the rules unique to this run end though. In addition to the damage limitations, given Spy's background in sneak and disguise, I've decided that any heist that can possibly be stealthed must be during this challenge, including the hugely difficult Firestarter and Mallcrasher. You might already see a problem emerging, but more on that later. As for the other rules, they're the same as usual. We start at level 0, infamy 0, no out of heist grinding for money or levels is allowed, and heist must be played solo, offline, outside of the use of a potential lifeline. Crew AI is always allowed for stealth heist, but cannot be used in loud. If the stealth heist has a loud escape, as in Car Shop, AI is allowed so long as any kills they get are immaterial to the result of the heist. This is going to be a modded run, however, outside of today's HUD mod, Vanilla HUD Plus, all installed mods are either visual or essential to the rule set. Finally, we will always play heists on the highest available difficulty, capping at Death Wish, meaning Mayhem up to level 80 and Death Wish from then onwards. Once again, lifelines are back. I plan to trial some new suggestions in the future run, but for today we're sticking to drop difficulty, allowing a single use reduction of difficulty by one stage, crew support, allowing us to enter a loud heist with Team AI turned on, and phone a friend, enabling us to run a single heist online with one other player who is forced to play with the same run restrictions. As I mentioned, there will be mods used in today's video, the most important being the heist stealth mods I've installed to increase the range of stealthing we'll have to take on. Basically, a few heists have been converted into stealth experiences, allowing us to adhere to the rules even further. Obviously, I'll point out and review these heists when I get to them. I've also installed the Spy Voice Line's Duke replacement mod. Effectively, this turns Duke into the spy and lets us immerse ourselves even further into the mindset of a bloodthirsty killer.
Why is it always this time of year we get assignments like this?
Honestly, this is one of the best voice line mods I've ever used, with some seriously clever design ideas, and I couldn't recommend it more. The spy interaction circle is, well, it's distracting, but seems pretty on brand for someone who described themselves as a handsome rogue. Oh, and I did my best to dress Duke up in his best spy attire, using this mask mod, but unfortunately this requires the heat glasses to be worn, which is not physically possible at Infamy 0, and sadly the ski mask is also an Infamy unlock, so unfortunately the cosplay game is going to be weak this time around. All that said, shall we? Loading in as Spy Duke after another hard account reset, the choice is pretty limited when it comes to heist number 1. I always try to avoid the loud tutorial as it requires the use of Team AI, meaning I sat around waiting for a stealthable heist to spawn for ages on CrimeNet. Car Shop is always an ideal option, meaning I can head into my first caper to gut some Cornish game hens. Fortunately, even at level 0, the Ursa knife is unlocked, meaning this isn't going to be another messy attempt at pacifism early on. In fact, stepping into the shoes of a sociopathic mercenary, I decided that civ kills would be entirely on the menu today. I just needed to ensure that I had enough money to build up my huge revolver collection, as this rule set actually grants the spy the largest available arsenal so far. Before heading in, I did pick up Invigorator and Accelerator as crew AI skills, using my starting Continental coins. Heading into the first heist, I was quickly exposed as a stealth fraud in need of a disguise, as I was forced to dominate this guard right in front of a camera. Not to mention, for whatever reason, Poco Hood, my recent go-to, seems to not like interaction bar retextures, as any time I finish an action, the spy's menacing mug would pop up the size of my screen. This was off-putting, to say the least. Even so, with the power of backstabs and no cash to even lose at this point, I was able to infiltrate the car shop via the rooftop and take out the manager and his mate. One sensible adjustment I made was packing the body bag case on Heist 1, making cleanup a little easier. To make matters worse on the UI front though, I noticed that a silhouette of Spy's head was also strangely marking out guards. Even with the technical difficulties hampering me though, I was able to hack the right computer immediately and flee in what was essentially a pacifist run. No, knives to civilian spinal columns do not count as murder in the spy's eyes. Poor driving made this closer than it needed to be, but I still scraped by on the all-important first heist. With this, I made a few adjustments, switching over to Vanilla HUD Plus to avoid those annoying conflicts and putting together my first build to complete getting ready. I immediately grabbed the first point in Hacker to gain access to the Pocket ECM. As of update 229, this thing has been hugely buffed. People were fuming at me for not going with Stoic for the demo run, despite the fact it's clearly an overpowered perk deck, so today I'm going to make it up to you by using Hacker, even though it's equally monstrous now. My headcanon is that it's a sapper of sorts, and disruption is in Spy's nature. I equipped a few skills in the Ghost and Technician trees to help with the stealth early on, and possibly foolishly, with my first 400 grand from stealing that car, I purchased the newly added Khan 357. Whilst it's one of the strongest revolvers in class, and has the fun gimmick of an 8-round cylinder, it isn't the revolver with the highest base concealment, which is exactly what I needed given the stealth requirements of this challenge. Even so, it'd do the job. Well, I mean, it'd do the job once I was finally able to go loud. You see, here is where I've made quite a mess in terms of designing the rule set. It's diametrically opposed to itself, as revolvers simply cannot be suppressed. Apparently, this is scientifically accurate, but it's pretty much the first time Payday's bothered about realism leaves me fuming. It's hard being an invisible rogue when firing your only ballistic option alerts literally everything on the map. This was going to massively ramp up the difficulty from here on in. With these limitations in mind, I put on some shades and head into heist number 2, the jewelry store. At the very least, I was able to equip the spy's trusty butterfly knife, the wing, for that vanilla loadout nostalgia. Sadly, it's not the strongest of melee options, as I walked too close to this guard on run 1, proving that phase stabs aren't quite as effective as I had hoped. However, this little trick knife would come in very handy when dealing with unruly civs on this heist. As an aside, it's pretty wild to me just how good this spy voice replacement mod is. I think it's genius that the creator, Microsoft Man, chose to give him guard responses for some of his pager lines, mimicking the disguise ability perfectly.
This place is A-OK.
After controlling the store, I also decided to steal as much loose loot as possible, as money early on is really important on this run, and I had to do something to offset the price of mass murder. Speaking of which, at one point things got a little out of hand on the streets, requiring me to pull out my revolver for its first kills of the run, using the Pocket ECM to keep civs in check, or dead. After that scare though, I was able to mercilessly finish this heist in just over 7 minutes. Using my newly earned skill points and cash, I secured higher concealment via the Akimbo Bronco primaries, and grabbed ECM Overdrive for the security door on Bank Heist Cash. Run 1 here was strangely reminiscent of the first jewelry store failure, with my knife attack provoking some very unwarranted aggression by the guards. On run 2, I was much more tactical with my plays, taking out the cameras before going for a couple of trick stabs in this little side room. Melee only bank heist is a surprisingly fun and fairly balanced challenge that I'd recommend you guys try out, even if you don't have the time to attempt a full throttle spy run for yourselves. The fake conga is also a nice touch for a pager. With all 4 security and the roaming bank manager all taken out of the equation silently, I was simply able to sit back and drill my way to victory on this one, going back and securing all loot to help me purchase a secondary Bronco for its 33 potential concealment, as well as a few attachments for my other guns. This brings us onto Diamond Store, which apparently had it out for me, with a 25% chance of spawning no alleyway door occurring an unbelievable 4 times in a row. Those are just mandatory resets when doing this solo. Once the game decided to work with me though, this is a really straightforward one, even knife only, managing to take out the security cams and all remaining guards on the 2nd floor. Again, this was a case of getting copious amounts of blood on my suit to keep the civs in check. I've wasted far too much time in the past restarting runs after stupidly deciding to keep a few pixels alive for no practical reason. This new spy-inspired ruthless streak let me safely escape the heist with every available loot bag. It was now time for the always dreaded Go Bank. This is a massive RNG fest in stealth, made even worse by the fact I can't shoot. This in mind, I had to fall back to plan B and equip the only silent range weapon allowed, the throwing knife. Sadly, Hacker, which I now had at perk rank 4, requires the use of a build throwable slot, meaning I'd have to essentially give up on my perk deck for now to access the knife. Again, far from ideal, but this really does spice up the challenge. I now had enough skills for ECM Specialist, making the rush section of this heist marginally easier, but even so, I did actually consider resetting until I rolled the 1% chance of an open vault, as that sounded like more fun than the frustration to come. But I'm a man of honour, and it looked like I'd be rewarded immediately, killing both guards and timing my ECM to prevent the cops being called. Unfortunately, I clearly hadn't cut large enough eye holes in my balaclava, as I missed destroying a camera which spotted the Switchblade massacre that was taking place at the time. On run 2, I managed a super precise throwing knife kill on the first guard, which allowed me to manage the ECM rush section with a little more guile, meaning I had complete control over the lobby and could start the time log. Alas, with about 2 minutes left on the timer, the GenSec call decided to throw a spanner in the works. But it looked like I'd nailed the takedown upon their arrival, stabbing one and skewering the other. I answered pager 1, I started answering pager 2, and then the unavoidable. A call came through that I was too slow in answering, ending the run immediately. I've not got this annoyed at the game in years, taking to Twitter to declare my absolute hatred for Go Bank, even above the biker heist, which was definitely not relevant foreshadowing for later in the run. Honestly, Go Bank is one of the few heists that you can look back at and say, I couldn't have done anything differently, yet I still failed. And whilst it is intended for multiplayer, I still think that's a miserable design trap to fall into. Moving on though, after I didn't like my RNG on run 3, I impatiently restarted for number 4, which was failed yet again at the hands of the GenSec responders. Kill me. Fuming, but undeterred, I headed in again, only to miss another camera during the bank control section and prove I'd learned nothing from this experience. Of course, with enough repetitions, you're bound to eventually just get lucky and succeed by default with a heist like this one. Eventually, I was fortunate enough to not have Flaming Jen from GenSec call me up until the time lock was already over, meaning I could immediately pick the deposits and leave with a bag without the confrontation. Had I touched one of those lasers? Who knows? Maybe you wouldn't be seeing this run at all. With that torture finally out of the way though, it was time for another of the early game walls, the train heist. As the demo man, we figured out that it was actually probably easier to just go at this heist in loud, but sadly that wasn't an option here. Although there's not half as much RNG in this one, it still suffers from that early Payday 2 stealth map curse of being a bag moving simulator with copious amounts of waiting for nothing thrown in. Now, after mentioning it in my last 10 things you didn't know video, I was curious to test out the drill baiting strategy to lobotomize a few potential guards on this heist, but run 1 was a spectacular failure, where I ended up using all 4 of my pages early on, and then the noisy drill alerted an additional 5th guard under the tracks. And this became a pretty common occurrence for the next couple of hours, with the loud drill entirely backfiring on me. On run 3, I got the glitch to work, but in the worst possible way, somehow baiting and freezing a guard a foot in the air right outside the train cart I was already stuck in. The only way out of this one would have been if I could mod a working InvisiWatch. On my final attempt at this strat, things seemed to be going a lot better as I trapped a guard permanently on the stairs, but after being caught out by a classic Payday stealth domino effect, it was ironically in front of the only guard I'd successfully frozen, meaning I was quickly sent back into loud. This called for a change in build. I simply needed drill skills to save me from myself. Fixing the build didn't fix my gameplay though, as I slipped up again and again at various stages of the heist. Sometimes it would be the janky geometry catching me out, others it would be my own hubris, trying to move civs in broad daylight to save on body bags. Eventually though, it all came together as I was able to put together a well-measured run, only killing when safe to do so and painstakingly moving the ridiculous number of bags by zipline. Decent RNG certainly helped, but you can't knock a clean 30-minute effort such as this one. Which brings us on to the first mandatory loud heist in the game, the standard armoured transport hits. Now that I was level 50, I could split into 2 separate builds, re-equipping the pocket ECM and grabbing those core necessity skills for this rule set, including uppers, partners in crime and shotproof. I also focused on the pistol-orientated gunslinger tree, which isn't quite as core for revolvers, but I do feel that trigger happy will be incredibly useful up against dozers. Weapon-wise, I packed my fully kitted out Khan 357 and my recently acquired over 9000 saw. Whilst I couldn't legally do damage with this thing, there's nothing stopping me using it for other objectives, which is huge when deposit boxes are in the mix. It's here that you get to see how ludicrously powerful the new Pocket ECM really is. Even without a fully maxed deck limiting my potential dodge, the jammer itself is so disruptive it gave me all the survivability I needed. Obtaining distraction jokers was still essential, but even so, I felt surprisingly tough to kill, and the revolver itself was no slouch either, easily handling most mayhem level enemies. You might notice in this gameplay that I seem to be able to swap converts without the first having died. This appears to be a function of vanilla HUD, which I have to admit did grant me some advantages, but I didn't even realise this was happening at first and don't believe it massively ruins the integrity of the run. The first of the mandatory 2 armoured transports was a walk in the park quite literally, and the second at the harbour really only caused problems due to spawning in snipers. Overall, a clean set of one-shot clears that had me brimming with confidence for the rest of this run, and in awe of how powerful Hacker was now proving to be. Unfortunately, the spy's expertise is meant to be for stealth, so my eternal reward would be janky throwing knife clears on the likes of 4 stores. Embarrassingly, this was a lot harder than it should have been, as after I'd secured the 15k already, I got greedy and found myself triggering the mother of all chain reactions as every goddamn civ on the map was shouting, "There's a spy over there." On run 2, I was getting deja vu. This was so sloppy from me. On attempt 3, I refused to take any unnecessary risks, basically just hanging around for 3 minutes without trusting myself to go out exploring. It was at this point that I penned a community poll about Payday 2 and its egregious wait times. It seems as though many of you agree stealth doesn't need such lengthy timers without the existence of objectives in between. But now the true extent of my patience was about to be tested. Mall Crasher is the most amusingly stealthable heist in the game. All you need to do is some seriously sneaky vandalism. Sadly, without being able to fire weapons, I was limited to my butter knife and throwing knives in this endeavour, wiping out the entrance before committing to the stores further in. Remember, destroying items one by one counts towards more destruction on this heist, meaning I was having to painstakingly stab shoes and vases in the least dignified mission of Spy's career. Until, after 8 minutes of this less than enjoyable experience, I overstepped on my run to the pair store, getting caught out and failing the stealth. Run 2 saw me getting a little experimental, trying to actively call the herd of downstairs guards, which proved effectively impossible given the population density of this heist. Back to basics for attempt 3, more sniffing shoes and murdering the civilians who bore witness to my crimes against Potts. Until some untidy bodybagging and a classic domino effect put an end to this one about halfway to the 50 grand goal. Time for a change of plan. Instead of dealing with the cops and civs at the entrance, I could just use my casing mode disguise to start in the most profitable area of the mall. The bag store lady suffered a fate far worse than death, but at least by going mole mode and shoving her head into the ground, I wouldn't have to bodybag her. Then I went on a rampage, doing some superficial damage to a set of handbags, before heading over to the pair store and ending the lives of some innocent headphones. One of the few good things about using the throwing knife was its surprising capacity to launch bodies in specific directions, allowing me to take out civs and guards marginally more safely than with melee. For whatever reason, throwing a knife at these box headphones causes them to fly off at such a velocity, I have no idea how I avoided smashing any windows on the rebound. Fortunately, I was able to damage the lot silently before securing the final dollars of destruction in the wine store. I'm sure this crime was entirely against Spy's very being, as a proud wine-loving Frenchman, but at the end of the day, he was being piloted by a true ale-loving Brit. Simple as. From there, it's just another couple minutes of waiting before fleeing in the most stealthy helicopter escape of all time. Ukrainian Job comes next, a heist I was somehow able to fail at least once. Scratch that, make it twice. Oh, or thrice. This was steadily teaching me to bring throwing knives on all stealth heists, irrespective of how I perceive their difficulty level. Without them, it took 4 goes before I finally had the patience to wait out the drills, escaping in just over 4 minutes. With a little loud coming up, it was time to pimp out my loadout, adding in the Kknowley, one of the best loud melee weapons in the game, and buying the fantastic Khan 357 Akimbos, which for some reason can be run with 7 bullets in each 6-round cylinder. Make that make sense. Despite its openness, White Christmas is a fairly manageable heist, and relative to other runs, I felt surprisingly comfortable defending myself over range and from snipers. A simple 7.5 minute clear. Now then, on to a first for this series, the addition of a modded heist. This is Stealthable Meltdown. And that's a great introduction. It seems that bringing Team AI is basically an instant failure on this heist. Trying again, this is a bit of an odd one. Virtually every guard on the map is stationary, making this more of a lamppost dodging simulator than anything else. Nothing has been done to update the objectives for stealth, so we simply have to find the missiles and jam some crowbars into the vents. It's a real dead ringer for the original Meltdown, just without any of the fun of a gunfight. Even so, I was interested to see how vehicles had been adapted to fit into an open stealth heist. and was a little disappointed to see that nothing had been done. It felt effectively impossible to actually move the warheads by forklift, and like hell was I carrying these things one at a time. Multiple runs were failed due to how rapidly you get spotted when driving. Not to mention, there are guards up in the rafters that physically can't be reached. This is not great design. But well, I could always try again, open up the container, and that's a skull dozer. They didn't turn off the random dozer spawns in stealth. Screw it, I'm absolutely going back to Loud. This wasn't a decision I took lightly, but if a custom heist feels barely playable, I'm not about to ruin a 50-hour challenge run as a result of it. Loud Meltdown is always a sizable hurdle for me to surmount anyway, so it's not like I'm scrimping out on the difficulty. The first attempt at Loud was going smoothly, as I was on my way to deliver the warheads after barely touching my key resources. However, Hacker is not brilliant up against SWAT van turrets, if only they got a shortened version of the ECM feedback hack. As a result, I missed my FAK placement and went down for the first time on this run. Run 2 was even less successful, as I learned the hard way that the spy's rivalry with the filthy Jarman sniper was alive and well. Whilst I had the tools to take them out, I was equally exposed to their high spike damage with my disruption and sustain orientated perk deck. Fortunately, on the next attempt, I got my act together, moving all 8 warheads on a single forklift, and just about managing to avoid death by SWAT van, as for some reason it decided to drive away from me. The hardest part from here is driving over train tracks without spilling millions of dollars worth of nuclear warheads. No biggie really. With Aftershock up next, I decided to mix up my weapons more frequently. Hell, the fact that I hadn't already been using the revolver that specifically designates itself as a Frenchman feels like a crime in and of itself. I do think the Kkn would be optimal here, but all the revolvers in the game can hold their own, enough to deserve some spotlight in this challenge. I was rewarded with a very successful first run of a heist, which often claims a few scalps along the way. Some blessed RNG meant that I'd gone without using an FAK for the first half of the heist, eventually having an absolute blast holding down this corner of the escape courtyard. A satisfying build and fun heist. In fact, this build really has only one counter: shields, which, thanks to the Galfang Smuggler Pack 3, can be offset by the RUS-12 Angry Tiger Revolver, a game-changing purchase for this run. But before I could try it out, it was time for a little nightclub stealth, which started fairly well, until I got caught in 4K shanking Civ number 100 of this run. Not a massive time loss though. I was able to reset and just wait out drills, and then wait out the loot van, and then wait out the escape car. This heist could be clearable in under 5 minutes if Overkill wanted it to be, but for some reason they decided we should spend about 10 minutes practicing our knife skills instead of moving on to a more interactive heist. Stealing Xmas is Vlad's final heist and is one I normally really enjoy. Unfortunately, all those minutes spent waiting for things to happen around me had dulled my senses, meaning although my body count was high, I was exposed to one of the unluckiest deaths I've ever faced, with a sniper somehow managing to thread the needle from atop the roof, dealing just enough damage for this regular SWAT unit to put me down instantly. And that wasn't as bad as it got, as on run 2, I managed to die in almost the exact same spot, this time at the hands of a Bronco beat cop, an embarrassment to spies everywhere. I'd say I was somewhat on tilt at this point. Sometimes the recording sessions go long, and this can be the result. Run 4 was going marginally better, until my aim completely deserted me, and I chose death once again. That might actually be one of the worst Payday plays I've ever seen. But after a much needed break, I pulled myself together, played infinitely cleaner, holding down the centre of the map before pushing up to the roof for the sniper covered objectives, just about escaping the scenario, admittedly with a sniper round lodged in my spine. Watch Dogs comes next in the story. I'm well known at this point for my dislike of the simplicity of Hector's heists. They really feel their age in my opinion, so I made damn sure not to go down on day 1 to avoid having to stretch them out for longer than necessary. Day 2 is also easy as hell, with just 4 bags to carry, making this a rapid Watch Dogs clear. Firestarter though was another beast on this run. You see, day 1 can theoretically be stealthed, but as a solo player with limited tools, I decided to install the Firestarter Day 1 stealth mod to turn off the Mendoza's instant alert mechanic and make this physically possible to sneak. That sure as hell did not make it easy. Undisruptible camera placements make it impossible to really go on the aggressive here, especially towards the west runway, as I failed again and again trying to take out the guards. Trust me when I say there's not enough time in the day to show every slip up here. Things went wrong often, as I was still trying to formulate a strategy, but fortunately these failures mainly came towards the start of the heist, which is more than can be said for some other frustrating missions later in this run. The main issue was how thin the margin of success was. Once I made it into one of the actual warehouses, I simply had to land every throwing knife or it would be game over. I did make it in to start securing the loot a few times, but it would only be a matter of time before I slipped up. At the very least, it was letting me get some good throwing practice in as a kill heist that's all about cloak and dagger. The clunky geometry here also didn't help. I'm not a big fan of having my knives caught by invisible walls. Or dying bodies for that matter. This guy put in work saving his friend and blowing a promising lucky run. I could be wrong, but I don't think I've ever failed a heist as many times as this one. With my persistence though, it was only a matter of time before I finally struck gold, getting the RNG with the best warehouse, which once cleared, actually contained 7 of the 8 weapon bags I needed. This was huge. From there I just had to endure the process of lugging those heavy bags all the way to the van. Yakuza here would have been seriously useful. Now I just needed access to the final bag, which was secured with the aid of my last ECM jammer. Wow, that was a nightmare. Day 2, which is usually a decently challenging heist, was bound to pale in comparison. Unfortunately, on my first attempt at it, the game decided to punish me by dropping 2 security guards in the room with the PC I needed to hack. Far from ideal, leading to a scramble with my knives and a shot fired in the wake of it. Run 2 was rubbish, and Run 3 was not much better when I was reminded that despite not being able to spot much of what's going on, a camera does get suspicious at the sight of an open box. A few more incredibly sloppy failures later, and Firestarter was really looking like it could contest the top spot for my worst heist of this run. Finally though, I got my act together, cut the power boxes safely, and fled to day 3 with just a single kill. And I was somewhat able to redeem myself here by smashing through the glorified bank heist without too many problems. Rats is the last of Hector's heists, and yet again I embarrassed myself early into day 1. Attempt 2 went infinitely better though. Remember, this is a simple holdout style heist, so I really shouldn't have too many issues with this build's ample firepower. Cooking is a popular French pastime, even if it is meth you're getting out of it apparently. The car park escape which followed was easy enough, and day 2 can always be stealth simply by handing over the bags. Finally, day 3 offers no real challenge at all with Hacker, as my ECMs essentially allow me to mow down the rest of the Mendozas without any resistance. This was the end of chapter 1 of the story, which caused far more trouble than it ever had in the past, predominantly due to the stealth requirement of this run. But things weren't going to get much easier proceeding onwards, with the challenging Big Oil next on the hit list. Day 1 is completely ECM rushable, making this one of the first times I was actually able to use my revolvers in stealth. Day 2 started clumsily to say the least, with 2 pure stealth slip-ups. Of course, this was a little bit harder than the standard stealth affair, as I was forced to not bring AI along for interaction speed and needed to run pocket ECMs for the loud escape, making murder far harder than it usually is. It was therefore a huge relief when I stumbled upon the engine blueprints early on and was able to hack into the basement without having to pick up a single kill. I'm a newly qualified nuclear fission scientist after speedrunning Big Oil previously, so picking out the right engine was child's play. The escape on the other hand was incredibly tense with the stealth build. I first hid out by the landing strip before fleeing to the opposite side of the property with the use of my ECMs. This just about bought enough time for the eventual close round escape by Chopper. Up next, framing frame can be a bit of a nightmare on day 3, so I finally decided to cave and secure 3 perk points in Yakuza, so I actually had a deck to aid in stealth. Day 1 tends to go pretty smoothly for me these days, even if I did accidentally flush a painting down the toilet. Day 2 is a non-event unless you get incredibly unlucky, leading us into the dreaded day 3. It's another heist that's heavily RNG dependent, but over my time speedrunning this heist I have learned a few shortcuts to make it a little more manageable. With the vault being right beside the bag shortcut, this was ideal RNG for me, as I took out 2 guards to make space for the risky bag moving section. Things were going perfectly, until like an absolute amateur, I forgot to close the bookshelf and managed to snap this guard going hostile on the painting cam. Not to worry, this is what ECMs are for. I just had to get down to him and then throw a knife in his, the 10% chance to fire on death once uncool. Lovely. Oh well, sometimes the RNG gods give straight after taking away, rolling the bedroom vault again and finding the 5 items in record time. With 2 guards out of the way already, it was just a case of securing the 8 bags quickly before they were spotted and escaping in 6 minutes 14 seconds. For reference, this was a seriously fast day 3 which I would have loved to have pulled off in my full game speedrun. With that, the stealth show continues with Election Day. This has to be my most played heist of 2022 thanks to the infamy speedrun, so day 1 went by in a flash. Day 2 though couldn't always throw a curveball my way, missing the key throwing knife by a hair and rightly getting dominated in return. Attempt 2 wasn't much better. Somehow I'd managed to forget to silence my saw, meaning I couldn't use it in the way I intended to with the silent saw tech. Instead of doing the sensible thing and restarting this entire heist to fix the build, I persevered hard-headedly and was fortunately rewarded for my hubris by 6 easy voting machine spawns that didn't require any drilling. I made a ruckus on the way out, just because I could really. After this, I fixed my saw with the silent motor and prepared to head into Big Bank, another heist I played to death recently. My plan was to give the drill baiting technique another chance to shine on the map it probably has the greatest application, which requires me to take out the guards found on the bank floor. In hindsight, I would have just been better playing normally as I'd practiced in the past. Changing things up just led to more room for silly mistakes, such as stabbing this guy directly in front of a camera. Attempt 2 was looking clean though. I made it to the vault and then back to the PC where I was paying no attention and walked directly into security. In what was rapidly turning into a series of unfortunate events, next time around I took down a guard perfectly out of the camera range, but then a random civ decided to spot me and walk, I think intentionally, straight into that camera. Only 3 slip-ups, but if you think I sound exasperated now, just you wait. Run 4 was ended by another impatient play, mainly caused by me still desperately going for the drill tech. Run 5 was a goddamn mess. I wiped out half the civilian population on this one before just getting overconfident on the vault side, and then on Run 6 I completely forgot that a guard was called up to the elevator, dispatching him right in front of his colleague operating the cameras. On attempt 7, I actually managed to get the drill lock to work, making pretty good use of it to secure 3 bags down the lift shaft, and then just about get caught out right in front of my least favourite camera on this heist. I'm sure this exact failure has happened to some of you guys before. At this point though, you might be seeing why I tend to skip over the truly embarrassing runs to save a little time. But seeing as you guys were determined to see them in the past, here's every time I cocked up Big Bank. On Run 8, this bloke slumped a little too close to a camera. On Run 9, the drill I left unattended caused a nasty chain reaction. On Run 10, I somehow managed to get caught by the guard I'd locked staring at a wall, and then was left looking like an amateur and a fool. On 11, I was civ spotted going for a risky hack. On 12, I was somehow witnessed sneaking between the banisters. On 13, I murdered right in front of the vault door again, the camera saw it. On 14, I played like a lunatic and was down for my troubles. On 15, I made my run to the vault and... murder. I've never been so close to quitting a run before on a stealth heist, but this honestly felt cursed to me. Still, I gritted my teeth and took on attempt number 16. I made it into the vault so many times before, I wasn't counting my chickens here, but fortunately this proved to be the one time I used my head, took it slowly, and still needed my ECM jammer to actually make it out in stealth. Wow, that was rough. I meant to actually be kinda decent at this heist. Ah well, onwards and upwards, specifically onto Hotline Miami. I switched up the build a little here, grabbing low blow basic specifically to help versus bulldozers, which right now required me to run a low detection risk option, so here's the first loud showing of my concealed Broncos. These didn't feel great to use, but day 1 isn't normally that difficult. With my Angry Tiger offering a decent option up against snipers, it was easy enough to enter the basement and then escape without too many close calls. Day 2 has offered up a difficulty spike in the past, but my firepower and disruption was pretty top tier already, even if my survivability wasn't quite there. I cleanly made it up to the Commissar's penthouse and had the DPS to wipe out the green dozers for once. The holdout definitely got sticky at times, especially as I was trying to use the fire to cover the drill, which isn't the easiest to fix with Hacker. But I kept on racking up the bodies until it was time to deal with the Commissar, who really isn't a big fan of getting ECM'd. How the tides have turned for old Spy, as I've gone from having nightmares on Big Bank to first timing the usually problematic Hotline Miami. And the good times just kept rolling onto Hoxton Breakout. Here I equipped the Mateva, a pistol that just about fits in the revolver category and I've barely used since it launched. Hilariously, it was a couple of basic beat cops who shut me down here and ended that feel-good streak. Hacker really can be frail if you switch off mentally, especially now I'd hit level 80 and was forced to play on Deathwish. I decided to get aggressive on run 2 to secure a Joker early on, only to have a SWAT turret spawn on me and shut it down instantly. By this stage, I was feeling decently powerful with low blow, but a bunch of minigun dozers spawning at the same time could still cause problems. The kind of man like me might be inclined to run away from. A retreat of sorts. But that was the smart heister's play, with my converts giving me the space to basically hide out by the parking lot and wait. Inside, the greatest threat is falling asleep during the 20-second lockpick timers. Unlike Demo Man, this time I was able to clear the FBIs on day 2 without too many issues, meaning it was just a case of holding down the operations room for the most part, as moving between objectives was surprisingly easy with Hacker. But this holdout was harder than I would have liked, going through almost a dozen FAKs trying to keep the cops off the power switch. Once the server was ready to be secured though, it was back to being an easy escape with a keycard and a jammer. Which brings us on to the second Hoxton themed heist, the Revenge. Now, I have a bit of a soft spot for this heist, but after being caught out in the open switching off the alarm box, it didn't look like I'd be getting to Hector on attempt 1. But for once, the security decided not to cascade on me, instead walking one by one into the spy meat grinder, letting me take 3 threats off the map in one go. This opened up the rest of the FBI building, allowing me to pop open Hector's vault with ease and escape over the fence with 6 items of evidence. The Diamond is the dentist's penultimate heist, and it usually doesn't cause too many problems. That seemed to be the case here, stealthily gaining access to the inner sanctum of the exhibit on my first time in. After a few tries, I got a nice easy pattern to follow, and apparently in my haste I misstepped on the final plate, setting off the alarm for no good reason at all. In truth, this was just a time waster, as the second run went almost identically to the first, except this time around I was a little more careful with my footwork, making for an easy clear. Finally, from the dentist, the Golden Green Casino is one of the most challenging solo stealth heists in the game. Yet, here's the thing I'm noticing with this run. If a heist is meant to be easy, I botch it to hell. If it's meant to be hard, I turn it into a walk in the park. And right now, that inverse stealth ability is on show for all to see on the casino floor. I had some difficulties getting from one end of the casino to the other, and did get a little lucky that no one spotted this blatant murder, but after that it was surprisingly smooth sailing, spiking the drink with a little guile, and making it into the security control room easily enough. With the cameras down, this heist was all but clear. Now usually, it would be here that I walked directly into one of the lasers protecting the coffer, sending me straight back to square one. But clearly, I've turned over a new leaf, as this really was as clean as it comes, and a first time clear of the GGC. Awesome. Onto the Butcher's heist. I'm sort of forced into the bomb dockyard for this one, as it's the only stealthable option of the two. This is another heist that's given me trouble in the past, but as I've built up knowledge of the potential keycard spawns, it'd be fair to say things have gotten easier with time. So much so that I was cruising my way to victory after just one slip up, setting the Moretta into motion and preparing to secure the bomb parts for a first time clear. That was until this Civ decided to do me dirty and determinedly walk directly in front of this camera after being sloppily alerted. A frustrating but fairly predictable setback in hindsight. Lesson learned, on attempt 3, I rapidly breezed through the initial keycard objectives, once again getting back to the side of the docks leading up to the escape. Out of fear of a rerun, I made sure to give this dock worker the big kill, clearing the way to what is really a quite simple escape. That was remarkably less painful than my usual experience with the dockyard, but Scarface Mansion is always a frightening proposition. The issue here is that I love to clear the pageless guards outside the building before proceeding inside, which is far harder to do when equipped with only a couple of knives. My first attempt was actually unbelievably solid, as is so often the case when I'm actually focused in on a difficult heist. I was landing trick stabs and cross-map throwing knives like they were nothing, until I made it inside and overstepped, just about breaking this guy's line of sight, causing him to shoot without recourse. As foreshadowed, this opened the floodgates for dozens of early restarts as I tried to capture the magic in a bottle I'd had on the first run. 3 tries later, I was back inside the mansion, but completely forgot to tidy up the bodies outside the back door, leading to this unsalvageable situation. And when it rains it pours, as it actually took me 10 more goes until I was back to that point in the heist, at which point, in my excitement, I was immediately cornered and broke stealth. But the rage resets don't end there, as on the very next run, my throwing knife just missed the one-shot kill timing on Ernesto, failing in what was actually a pretty nostalgic way. Nostalgically painful, as this meant yet another 5 minutes spent honing my knife skills before I'd get a chance at the interior again. And unsurprisingly from this series, it was a very similar situation next time around, as the Sousa boss glitched in and out of his chair for a moment, dodging my knives with more grace than he'd ever know. Except those were my last knives, meaning I had to charge him, which was about as successful as you'd imagine. After a couple of hours of this purgatory, I finally got it together, reaching the main office for the third and thankfully final time, landing my throwing knife calmly, and getting the hell out of Dodge with enough of Jimmy's special sauce to forget that nightmarish experience ever happened. With that chapter finally behind me, the crime-spree mission was next, giving me a slight reprieve. I simply bought the spree at rank 20 and smashed out an easy transport job for completion. Counterfeit, our hero's next bump in the road, has always been a controversial heist. Should stealth be possible on it normally? Did Mark MB destroy the experience economy by sharing his bugged stealth loop with the world back in 2020? Well, once again, we installed a mod to give us all the answers. Now Counterfeit is stealthable without breaking Payday's AI. Of course, this ended up being incredibly easy. I just had to pull off my usual stealth setup and then take out the responding police force silently. I could be wrong, but I feel like stealth is enforced here simply by preventing this cop from entering the house and triggering a stealth breaking script. Clever, but not exactly a clean conversion, as after sitting around twiddling my thumbs for 5 minutes, I was left wishing this was a loud heist, as then I'd at least have something to do. Shortly after blasting open the safe, I stumbled upon the real issue with this mod, as the shield spawning script still plays out despite the police not being called, making for a pretty awkward confrontation as both sides must have been entirely confused by the other's presence. Fortunately, my crew AI were strangely functional here, reviving me and allowing for a first-time escape, silently. A truly sneaky performance by all involved. I'm honestly not sure how to feel about any of this. Not only was this heist super boring and janky stealth, I suppose I should probably use up my crew AI lifeline for that revive, but seeing as how I didn't break stealth, I have no idea how to rule this situation. Maybe I'll keep away from the wild and wacky mods for future runs, although knowing me, I doubt it. First World Bank comes next, a true classic that no one can doubt was perfectly converted as a stealth heist for Payday 2. We get down and dirty with the security early on, which I normally try to avoid, but seeing the stealth was maintained, I carried on into the vault area of the bank. A few more dead civs later, and I was into the vault and clearing it out of 8 whole bags of cash. Honestly, no civ was safe on this run, especially once into the offices, a violent, if comfortable completion in the end. Murky Station has rapidly become the heist I like to attempt when I want to feel better about myself. I'm strangely a savant at this one, finding both EMP parts immediately and escaping with not so much as a scare in 4 minutes. I wish I could say the same thing about Jimmy's second job, Boiling Point. You've heard me complain about this before, but it's absolutely one of the most difficult Death Wish heists in the game, even when not mucking around with a bunch of revolvers, predominantly due to the extra powerful Russian tasers that can spawn. But despite a few early scares and the slight ammo inconsistency of the Akimbo Matevas, I was able to get into the lab first time around. Things tend to get easier for a while up close and personal, especially when the dreaded roof turrets decide to mercifully despawn and never come back apparently. As a result, I was able to scan a super soldier, grab the server and head back up to the surface. Here's where the big iron on my hip really put in the work, taking out the snipers one by one before they could even lay a glove on me. Following on from a pretty exhilarating experience, Santa's Workshop is another heist that's been given the stealth treatment by the modding community, and this one is actually super unique. The biker guards are plentiful, but have been given fixed movement patterns, meaning it plays out more like a game of Frogger than anything else. I like that parkour entry is required, but I'm not a huge fan of the volume of cameras. From what I experienced, it feels like if the elves spawn on the left side of the warehouse, you're pretty much screwed, leading to dozens of restarts on my end. However, on the right side, things were far easier. You see, the objective of this stealth conversion is still the same, simply get the elves to wrap Colombian snow-filled presents, which doesn't make a ton of sense in a stealthy environment. Once I found out you only needed 1 bag to clear the heist, things got even easier still. All I had to do was find a lone elf, prime for intimidation, and wait out the escape. Whilst I feel as though a lot more effort has gone into crafting this heist than some of the previous ones we've seen, it's just lacking on the objective front, making it a little too easy if completion is your only goal. Fortunately for me, on this run, that is precisely the case, so we move on to Car Shop. No point dwelling on this one. If I was able to clear Toya Autos at level 0, I'd sure as hell hope I could do it in the 80s, a quick win for the spy. The biker heist is next on the hit list, a heist synonymous with failure and frustration on this channel, and after downplaying my hatred of it earlier on, you guys know it's going to be out for blood again. Unlike other heists I've had issues with on this challenge, such as Scarface Mansion, the biker heist doesn't have an initial difficulty spike, allowing for a nice early restart. No, this one likes to wait until you're comfortable, I don't know, about 5 or 6 minutes in, to kill your hopes and dreams out of nowhere. It took me slowing this down to 0.3 times speed to actually work out who'd finish me off. Even later into my next run, I was hit by the biker heist special of sniper clipping through geometry just to land the perfect shot to remove 90% of your health and armor right in front of a pair of unfriendly dozers. Classic. If you like this one, you'll love how run 3 was cut short. Honestly, even slowed down, I'm still struggling to work out what the hell killed me here. It was a little bit clearer on run 4, where my clearing competence was the obvious reason for my downfall, before I was finally able to pull myself together and actually construct a half-decent biker heist attempt. It was Collateral City for my angry tiger on this one, dragging me all the way kicking and screaming to the escape section. With most snipers out of the way, finally I had the momentum to clear the compound and ride Russ's bike off into the sunset. Except, does Spy look like a man who'd be comfortable driving a Harley? The evidence says no, as does this tunnel, as yet again I pull a Robin Hood and jam myself sideways in it, not for the first time in this series. You'd think I'd have learned my lesson by now, but no, I was once again shuffling my way to the escape with whatever dignity I still had intact. Day 2 is this heist's redeeming quality, a fun romp down a moving train before a short boss fight that was an awful lot easier with just a couple of little revolvers than it had been with a massive rocket launcher. Hacker is very good at running away from things, making this escape one of the easiest so far. My old nemesis, Panic Room, comes next, a heist that I've not actually struggled with since the first run, but still like to make a big deal out of for some reason. The sniper section did get a little intense, with me having to lean heavily on uppers to actually take them out on the rooftop, but despite my liberal FAK usage, I still had enough healing to place a C4 and blow the Panic Room free, escaping to the sewers in a fast and loose rendition of Aussie's Shooting Simulator. Brooklyn 1010 makes up the other half of Sniperville, but the accuracy of revolvers over range was really carrying me through these usually difficult heists. Whilst I was let down by my jammer on run 1, going down with it active, on the second attempt I was easily able to clear the second apartment building and escape to the roadside. Here I was functionally able to hold off at the escape for long enough to move the police cars and secure my exit. Onto the yacht heist. This is the sort of mission this challenge was made for, a high-class stealth-only caper, which obviously means something had to go wrong immediately, failing my first attempt at the hands of civilians once again. My second wasn't a lot better, as although I saved a double-pager situation, this Civ managed to call the cops faster than any I'd seen before. She's doing a better job than most trained guards in the Payday universe. That last though, third time is a charm, as I quite easily located the 4 money stash locations without any undue murder this time, giving me complete freedom to secure the lower deck and grab the hard drive without too many issues. Back over on Loud, we have 2 of the toughest classic heists I needed to face to make it onto the home straight. Undercover is a high intensity heist with plenty of problematic RNG and a sniper infestation that even this build struggles to stay on top of. Case in point, my first round was going excellently before being abruptly cut short by a single blow from this sniper, even from above half health. In hindsight, it looked like I'd been luckier than I'd realised escaping the rooftops on the first try, as I wouldn't be able to replicate that at all on the second, finding myself trapped on the staircase by snipers and eventually skulldozed to oblivion. I don't want to talk about round 3. Again, I'm still confused as to what did that much damage to me in such a short space of time. Not having a convert was a problem for this build. Even after getting the remotely safe limo spawn on the next run, I was again forced onto the roof in order to grab the server, which ended up being too hot to handle. I also learned on this heist that a green dozer can one-shot me from full health. Always nice to know. Run 6 was a little kinder in its RNG, dropping the limo down to the staircase, making it much easier to crack without an army of snipers staring directly at me. Once I got the taxman down to the ground floor, it was much easier to hold things together as my revolver build had just about enough close-range DPS to stay on top of the seemingly endless flow of cops. With a modest amount of torture, I was able to secure the 3 passwords from the taxman and escape to the rooftops without running into the army of snipers who must have felt quite left out on this one. Slaughterhouse is yet another hugely problematic heist I have to face here, being a stealer of lifelines in the past, so I picked up Feigned Death to finally emulate the effects of the Dead Ringer. The first half of the heist is just fine. I'm normally able to drill a safe and pick up the goal without too many problems. Admittedly, Feigned Death was already forced to do a fair bit of legwork, going off twice early on. But the process of actually moving that goal to the extraction point is where things get tricky. However, this time I had a secret weapon. The hacker ECMs made loot secure infinitely easier with their crazy word range disruption. With this tool at my side, I was able to move the loot in sets of 3, 3 and then 2 without really having to push against the oncoming tide of cops. Snipers were still annoying, but with the Angry Tiger, I was able to wallbang my shots and avoid any personal risk when dispatching of them. It was massively helpful that the SWAT van turret decided not to spawn on me here, but even so, this is one of the few times I've felt like I've been in control of the outcome of a slaughterhouse. I decided to hold back at the entrance to the warehouse before making a break for the van once given the opportunity. Not the cleanest escape, but the fact that I was able to do this without the help of AI here shows at least some growth of character, or it just emphasises the fact that Hacker is now completely overpowered. You decide. In any case, it was finally time to start wrapping up this run as Locke steps into the picture. Beneath the Mountain is a really hit or miss heist in my experience, and my first attempt went the way of miss. It didn't help that my hood froze, leaving me with a rather off-putting image of Spy grinning at me in my final moments. But I was able to pull myself together for a much more competent performance on Run 2, until I made it to the roof of the compound. Here, the monstrous power of the sniper shield started to go to work. These guys deal crazy damage over range on Death Wish and caused my somewhat limited range build some serious problems. I revived once with my newly unlocked Messiah, and then 2 more times with the 45% chance of feigned death. Luck truly was on my side here, but I was still forced to cower behind the escape chopper and hold for the refuel. Honestly, not the most dignified way to complete a heist, but Death Wish shields are seriously OP. All that mattered though was Beneath the Mountain had been bested. Birth of Sky is another heist that's caused real difficulty in the past, not only with its sniper-filled design, but also the endlessly cop-filled underground escape which had led to a repeated use of drop difficulty. And it looked like things for the Spy would be just as dire when I was actually shot and killed directly out of the sky before I even had the chance to get boots on the ground. Not a great start, but for once this wasn't a premonition of things to come. I was actually able to land on the next skydive, although the damn Spy's face did freeze yet again. This just means you need to stare into his eyes as I manhandle Birth of Sky. When possible, I like to secure the broken pallet first, before moving on to the sniper-covered second two. At one point, I even turned my hood off, just to get a better chance of actually landing my shots on these guys across the map, which worked until I required the activation of Feigned Death yet again. This bought me just enough time to secure the final pallet and make it into the sewers. Here, the pocket ECM, not for the first time in this run, is absolutely clutch, holding off the endlessly spawning wave and giving me just enough time to light the thermite and get into the dinghy. Admittedly, I wasn't taking any chances on the water bank, hopping out of the raft to ensure the outcome was never really in doubt. Now, I was flying. With 3 lifelines still in the bank, there weren't many heists left that could really trip me up. Heat Street can be a nightmare on Death Sentence, but on Death Wish it's surprisingly easy. Reaching Matt's overturned vehicle in record time, burning him out and pushing him up the street to what was a remarkably simple heist completion. If only the same could be said about Green Bridge. This always throws us a few curveballs and opportunities to cock up. The randomised prisoner location can make life harder, but here I was lucky enough to find them in the first van, escorting him straight up the scaffolding without too many interruptions. But here is where the heist gets really dangerous, having to hold out against scripted dozers, snipers and a helicopter turret. All in all, the spy build did a decent job, but did lose a lot of precious resources in the process. I was weakened by the holdout, but it was the escape that claimed the victory, throwing all those nasty things at me once again, but this time without any cover, a failure painfully late into the heist. Not to worry, all I needed was some similarly positive RNG, and I'll be right back to, of course, the prisoner spawned in the van furthest away from where we needed to go. Even so, I was able to recover things and once again leverage my high mobility and DPS to secure the informant at the pickup. This time, instead of trying to fight back, I just full on booked it. Sometimes you can't go wrong with a little bit of cowardice, especially when it comes to beating Green Bridge. Now onto the betrayal with Alaskan Deal, the first heist in a while that I was able to cruise through without any Messiah or Feigned Death activations, just good clean shooting and a lot of uppers abuse. Taking us on to the final Payday 1 classic, the Diamond Heist. Normally I attempt this in stealth, fail, and get fed up, but today I have no such option. However, on attempt 1 I was blessed by some excellent laptop spawns and a half decent bag secure location. Hell, Garnet Jr. even seemed to walk over and virtually ask for a gaping stab wound. As a result, I was rapidly into the vault and one by one carrying the loot to the boys upstairs. I've come to realise that this heist is a case of slow and steady winning the race, so I took my time and flanked the diamonds around the building whenever I thought it necessary. In the end, I even had time to go back and secure the blood diamond, just to assert my dominance on a usually troublesome heist. Reservoir Dogs is a tale of 2 days. The first at the warehouse is relatively simple, which usually lulls me into a false sense of confidence before the nightmarish gunfight at the jewelry store. This seemed to play out as expected, smashing through day 1, only to be obliterated by a bunch of first responders on day 2. However, thanks to the power of the Revenant tree, I was given a second chance at life, which I clung onto with both hands. I first avenged myself upon the many dozers of the ambush, and then forced my way into the vault. In the past, it's always been the bag moving process that has ended this heist prematurely, and with the constant stream of spawning snipers, even Hacker was fairly exposed to this possibility. Fortunately, the insane amount of disruption this deck offers, alongside its innate dodge, meant that I was able to run the bags at speed with surprising ease. When half the enemies on the map are covering their ears for about 8 seconds, you'll be shocked at what you can get away with. After securing the 6th and final bag, I made one last sprint across the street, pushing to the escape without failing a single attempt. A first, I believe, within this challenge. Lao was going so well, of course it's sod's law that I needed to run Brooklyn Bank with the Save the Situation stealth overhaul. In creating this mod, Metroline also seems to have created a species of uncanny civilians that are not, shall we say, normal. I felt as if I'd walked straight into Innsmouth on this one. Even Bobblehead Bob wasn't quite how I remembered him. These admittedly hilarious bugs aside, this is an excellent stealth overhaul. I may have been overwhelmed by the situation and failed run 1, but only needed a second chance to work out what to do, entering silently through the top to take out a couple of guards, before sneaking to the downstairs offices to secure the password. The difficulty here is maneuvering in such a tight space, with vanilla stealth heists not normally as claustrophobic as this one, making it surprisingly unique. With the code secured, I did Abomination Bob a favour and turned him back into a normal looking man, opened up the vault and switched off the lasers back upstairs. From here, all I needed to do was wait out some thermite and grab the medallion from under the floor as usual. As a resourceful man, all the spy needs are his bare hands to dig a tunnel into the sewers in an instant. Probably a more impressive feat than any of these heists we've been completing. A successful clear of what was certainly a fresh experience in stealth. This got me in the mood for yet another stealth heist, the notoriously difficult Breaking Feds. For once, I decided to use all the tools at my disposal and equip some sensor mines, massively helpful on a high guard population heist such as this one. On run 1, the correct PC spawned in the kitchen, which is usually an instant restart, but I was feeling myself today. This Civ's back looked very stabbable, meaning I was able to create the room I needed to actually complete the hack and get to the electric fence in time, admittedly with a fair bit of backwards and forwardsing. Garrett's room spawned on the right side of the offices, which I generally prefer, meaning I could lock it down with the sensor mines and always have sight on the patrolling guards. Admittedly, that didn't guarantee I wouldn't have to kill anyone, but what the rest of the FBI don't see won't hurt me. After getting the correct passcode for Garrett's safe, I had the elephant's coffer in my hands and was out of the heist before I could even take it all in. This is yet another problem heist absolutely dominated in stealth. With that, we're on to only the juiciest of heists from here on in. Henry's Rock is a challenging one. It definitely opened up the frailties this build suffers from, especially during the turret hacking section, where I was overran again and forced to lean on my FAKs more than I'd like to admit. But survival was paramount. So long as I kept breathing on these heists, I had every chance of making it through their toughest moments simply due to the power of the Pocket ECM. That was exactly the situation here. Although the science and weapon lab holdouts had massively diminished my healing pool, the usually nightmarish turret hack sequence was entirely conquerable with Hacker. After taking those down, I had more than enough space to secure the 2 remaining coffers during a lull in the assault wave, another massive first time clear. Shacklethorn is up next, one of my favourite heists in the game in both loud and stealth. I'm well practiced at this one by now, rushing the initial objectives, taking out a few roaming guards, and knowing the risks that I could take to access the vault password. No need for any resets once again, I was finally living the role of the stealthy spy. And thanks to the wonderful world of mods, I could keep that role going with the stealth version of Hell's Island. I've actually covered this heist overhaul before, as it was a cut above the rest in that it completely changes the direction the heist is played in, as well as most core objectives. Unfortunately, I was sloppy on attempt 1, using up pages early on, which makes the final objectives on this heist much more difficult, soon finding out after being forced to take down my 5th guard, failing stealth instantly. Attempt 2 went much cleaner on the prison rooftops, allowing me to head down and cause some chaos around the cells with all 4 pages remaining. With these guys out of the way, it was just a case of grabbing the required loot, calling out the prison officer for a little one-on-one backstabbing session, and securing my escape through the usual hidden entrance by the manhole cover. A really fun and well-crafted heist, fertile grounds for the spy run. With that, we move on to No Mercy. Whilst this heist cannot be fully stealthed, it does have a stealth section that I wanted to at least attempt. However, knowing that I needed to get into combat after it regardless, I was forced to run the Pocket ECMs. Knock-on effect being no throwing knives, so I need to take out all 3 cameras with just my little knife. At first it appeared like this was impossible, but with enough stabbing practice and the right camera spawns, I learned you can just about make it in time. Awesome! But every single time I managed it, a couple of doctors who weren't showing up as alerted kept somehow smashing the panic button and setting off the alarm. As I'm not sure there's a clever way I can deal with this while still being able to play and complete the loud portion of the heist afterwards, I decided after multiple identical failures just to go with the flow and enjoy using my trusty enforcers for the final time in this run. As we know, No Mercy is not a difficult heist, but when the aim of the game is simply to have as much fun making helmets fly as possible, it really does scratch an itch. The itch of murder, which Spy absolutely loves to partake in. I found the patient in the final room I drilled, and it took ages before I had 2 positive blood vials, but honestly, that just allowed me to spend more time hitting big angry tiger collaterals and ripping through the corridors with my akimbos. I'm a huge fan of Hacker, and have to admit the revolver class has really grown on me over the course of this challenge run. But with the hospital successfully fled, there was only one more heist between me and that sweet taste of victory: the White House. In stealth, I always find my skills with this one to be hit or miss, but as you've already seen from the prior heist, I was feeling myself today. Ghosting on in, accessing the West Wing almost instantly, and finding myself the Piot card in what felt like record time. I did run directly into this poor guard on the way out, making him the unlucky recipient of the final kill of the heist award. You see, once in the Piot with 3 pages still remaining, I could just surprise and intimidate the few guards in the control center, allowing me to bloodlessly take over the White House and prevent the spawn of a 4th possible guard. The cleanest and smoothest way to take down the greatest heist of all. With the partners under his arm, Yale Wonk removed his mask and headed towards Locke's chopper one final time. As he witnessed the breadth of his achievement, he wept, for there were no more backs to stab. With that success, I can confirm, once and for all, that you can beat Payday 2 as Team Fortress 2's Spy, although no, there will be pain along the way. This has been one of the craziest challenge runs I've faced down so far. The highs were in the heavens, the lows felt like we were in the pits of Tartarus. I think revolvers had a surprisingly good showing, despite often being thought of as a lower tier weapon option. Just having a tool to easily dispatch of snipers was kind of a game changer, making Loud in this challenge slightly easier than for runs in the past. Funnily enough, this is the first 100% completion of a challenge without me using a lifeline, although thanks to the stealth requirement, I'm fairly certain it's also the run with the most total restarts. So I'm really not sure where I'd rate it on the difficulty scale. But at the end of the day, being the Spy is all about deception, even if you have to use all the tools at your disposal to get the job done. Sometimes that just means cutting a little footage here, splicing it there, until there you have it, a masterpiece. Run complete. On to the next one. Alright, in all seriousness, I want to come clean on both Firestarter and Mallcrasher. The alarm actually went just before my escape, but after I'd completed the entire objective stealthily. Seeing as these heists weren't intended to be stealthable, there's functionally no way to discern what had occurred. As such, if you want to call this challenge a failure, you're well within your rights to, but there was just something so wonderfully thematic about keeping it quiet on this run until now, so I decided to roll with it. If I ever bend my rules on these runs, I always want to be transparent about it, as trust is pivotal to what makes these challenge runs interesting, their perceived difficulty. So rest assured, I'll be on the straight and narrow in the future. As for that future, I plan to go hard on the challenge runs over the winter period, so keep those suggestions coming my way. I'm working on an extensive document list for potential Payday challenges, so still love to hear your ideas, even if it'll take me a while to get around to them. With that, if you've stuck with me this far into the video, you may be enough of a Payday mega fan to appreciate my range of Payday playing machines from Apex Gaming PCs. We recently learned that Payday 3 will be launching on PC and current gen consoles exclusively, meaning if you're coming from PS4 or Xbox One, you have all the more reason to pick up a new high-end gaming rig to get prepared for that 2023 release. All that said, thank you so much for watching. I love making these videos for you, and we'll see you all very soon.
Well, the moment has passed. Back to work!
A huge thank you to my dedicated Patreon backers. If you want to join this crew in going infamous, check out the link below and pledge as little as $2 to see your name in the credits, or get 24-hour early access to future videos and vote on upcoming content. Take care, I'll see you all soon.